It's time to move on to the next item of business, and the final item of business is topical questions, and I call James Kelly.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what arrangements have been made to enable prisoners to have contact with their families during the COVID-19 outbreak.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first and foremost, can I apologise to James Kelly for the technical issues that I had last time round, but I can thank him for this important question and recognise and value the importance of family links and the impact that restrictions, particularly the suspension of visits, has had on those in custody and indeed their families. The Scottish Prison Service has been working hard to introduce a variety of different initiatives to enable contact between those in custody and their families during the current COVID outbreak. From next week, virtual visits will go live at a number of sites, allowing those in custody and their families to have video calls. This scheme will then be rolled out across the prison estate in coming weeks. In addition to this, as I've referenced in portfolio questions, restricted mobile phones are being introduced across the prison estate as another way of supporting those in custody. Directions to the prison rules to allow this to happen will be laid before Parliament next week, with the rollout of phones starting thereafter. In addition to that, the Email a Prisoner service is available in all prisons, as is prisoner voicemail, which allows those in custody to listen to messages from friends and family.
James Kelly.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As the Cabinet Secretary noted, the restrictions at the current time make it very challenging for prisoners and their family due to the lack of contact. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary why, when visits have been cancelled from March the 24th, taken nearly 3 months for the introduction of these virtual visits, and also what steps will be taken to deal with those who don't have the IT capability or adequate data in their devices to be able to make the arrangements for virtual visits?
Cabinet Secretary.
So they're both very important questions. First and foremost, I know James Kelly will absolutely understand this, but nobody during this COVID-19 pandemic, let alone the Scottish Prison Service, has been sitting on their hands, twiddling their thumbs. There has been almost a public health crisis for us to deal with, and therefore the efforts have been going into making sure that we deal with that public health crisis to keep as many people in our prison safe as possible. I remind the member that at its peak of this crisis, we saw 100 people across the prison estate self-isolating at any one time. That number has now reduced, as I say, to single figures. So that effort, first and foremost, has been focused on the public health imperative. In relation to mobile phones and virtual visits and the time that has taken, clearly getting the infrastructure set up in these matters does take time. But again, it's not the case that the prison service have been doing nothing in that regard. They have given extra credit to prisoners so they can call their families. They have introduced and rolled out the Email a Prisoner system across all establishments, as well as prisoner voicemail as well. But I hope the member would understand that when it comes to virtual visits or indeed mobile phones, and I know he does understand this because of his vast experience in these matters, there is digital infrastructure across some prison estates which frankly need updating and upgrading that has taken some time.
James Kelly.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Scottish Human Rights Commission has identified that restrictions placed on prisoners leaving their cells and lack of exercise can potentially compromise a prisoner's mental health and well-being. What arrangements have been made to ensure that health and mental health checks have been carried out in prisoners to ensure that there's not any undue deterioration in their health during these difficult circumstances?
Cabinet Secretary.
Really good question by James Kelly. Again, I've met with the Scottish Human Rights Commission on a number of occasions, or had calls with the Scottish Human Rights Commission on a number of occasions during lockdown measures. And what I would say to James Kelly, what has made our job immeasurably easier to do has been the reduction in the population. And I know he supported the early release scheme. And because of that, we've seen over 1,000 prisoners, not just from the early release scheme, but from the reduction in court business. We've seen a dramatic drop in our prison population of over 1,000 prisoners. And that has made the attention that we can give to each prisoner, whether it's on the physical health or the mental health, that's so much better. In terms of the mental health point that he makes, it is an issue that the Scottish Prison Service and I speak about on a regular occasion. There is information provided to each prisoner in terms of the mental health well-being. But clearly, if there's anything further that we can do, we will look to explore that.
Thank you. That concludes topical questions, and I close this meeting. Thank you very much.